clips of people reacting to the question, how do you feel about leaving the planet and traveling in space? So the reason I'm presenting it or introducing it is because I missed the memo that you could just do an audio reaction to it, and I actually just made a little film. So the first film you'll see in it is this film, Cosmic Goop. So when I was thinking about leaving the planet and traveling in space, I was really thinking about what I would see if I was sort of looking back and thinking about what, I don't know, like all the bad things we've done for the planet, we've also left some pretty good things too. And I was maybe thinking a lot about how throughout my life I've kind of playlisted and soundtracked my life, and music's been a massive part of that. And I think I was just, I think I gave into randomness really, and just felt, well, I'm going to open myself up to the universe and see what hits while I'm thinking about this. And I was randomly thinking about a comic artist called, I don't know if you can see that, but that's too weird, isn't it? Can you see that? No. Oh, there you go. Called Jack Kirby, from like the 1950s, and he used to do these brilliant illustrations, but his best stuff I always felt was when he did stuff with the universe and what I call his cosmic goop, this kind of weird stuff he used to make. And so that was swimming in my mind, and then I was thinking about how I might soundtrack my exit from the planet. And my friend sent me a song called a version of a song called Stakes is High, which is a sort of big song as part of my life. And it was, this version was recorded by a school band in Brooklyn. And I just started thinking about how each of these versions become new orbits around old songs. And so I just made a film called Cosmic Goop of me, affected the ideas of me disintegrating into the universe and becoming part of the tapestry of the universe and into cosmic goop. So that's the first film. After that, there's a set of clips from people with their oral reaction to that thing. Over to you, Rafy.
When I was young, I wanted to be an astronaut. I'll never forget once looking up into the night sky in the countryside in China and seeing the sky full of stars and the occasional shooting stars and being mesmerized by its beauty. I think there's something awe-inspiring about the sheer number of stars there are in the sky. It reminds me of our smallness compared to the vastness of God's creation.
The philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein pointed out that there is no rule in tennis about hitting the ball 1 mile into the air, because nobody can do that. But somewhere in space, there must be planets, small planets, maybe moons, maybe asteroids, where the gravity is so weak that you can hit a ball 1 mile into the air. So then you'd have to invent wholly new games. You could call one of them Wittgenstein tennis. That would be one good thing about travelling in space, about escaping the Earth. And then there are the obvious ones, the contemplation of the great black void, seeing our own planet from the outside, contemplating its magical fragility, which yet somehow manages to survive until now. I'd love to be a rover exploring the surface of Mars or another planet. But I don't accept Elon Musk's ridiculous idea that humanity can go and live on Mars when things get really bad on Earth, because I think things would have to be so appallingly bad on Earth for Mars to be a better option that really there'd not be much point existing anymore anyway. I also don't want to travel in one of his rockets because they blow up all the time. There has to be a better way. But I'd like to quote something that Albert Einstein said, which is both about the mystery of reality and his dress sense. He said, "Once you accept the universe as matter expanding into nothing that is something, wearing stripes with plaid comes easy." I'll say it again, it's profound. Once you can accept the universe as matter expanding into nothing that is something, wearing stripes with plaid comes easy. So, if you'll excuse me, I'd like to do this. There. Stripes with plaid. Existence and nothingness. Professor Einstein, I salute you. Have a good day.
The one place that I know I'd like to go is Titan, because it has oceans and a landscape that was actually photographed by the Huygens lander, and it's tantalizingly similar to planet Earth. The terrain looks recognizable. Of course, what look like rocks are blocks of ice, and the water is methane, and the temperature is extremely low indeed. It's almost -200. So one wouldn't really last very long without some good warm clothes and a spacesuit. But I would love to go there, and go to the seas, because I was thinking that with low gravity and tides caused by Saturn, the tides must be enormous, and the waves could be gigantic, maybe hundreds of miles high, and they would be moving very slowly and crashing down again very slowly, which must be a sight to see.
I've considered the question after my initial enthusiasm. It's occurred to me that every time I leave my flat, I have to go back about 3 times because I'm worried I've left the gas on. So when I think of that on a planetary scale, leaving the planet, I think I'd just be too preoccupied with everything that I'd left undone to enjoy it properly.
Sometimes when one changes one's glance, one sees a flicker, a kind of after image, and you think there could be someone or something there. You look back, do a double take, and there's nothing. If you wear glasses, then you have reflections, and these occurrences are more common. I predict that on the moon, when we have long stay lunar stays there, that there will arise the idea of a lunar phantom. On the moon, one would always see the landscape through a visor or window.
Me the moon alone. Leave the moon alone. It is our moon, our moon. Leave the moon alone. It is our moon. It belongs to us. Never take it. Keep away from it. I warn you. Only bad things can happen if you touch our moon.
So last summer we're in lockdown and Dragon X1 made its maiden flight, and it was really exciting because everything about it to me was super new and sleek, a horizon to the future, if you like. So the astronauts were wearing kind of all-in-one fitting spacesuits with kind of visors that moved with their faces, and their gloves moved with their hands so they could touch the screen like as if it was more kind of normal. And the touch screen they were touching had super kind of clean, whiz-bang kind of graphics. So to me this was exciting, having seen for decades with previous space missions from NASA using very old switches and dials. This is all very much sleek and new, very exciting.
My thoughts on leaving the planet. I'm actually really impressed with scientists, astronauts, people who spend a lifetime finding out about the different galaxies and the universe, and I'm always slightly embarrassed to admit, to confess that I don't share this enthusiasm. I love it here. I love it on this planet. This is my favorite planet, planet Earth. And I am really happy to stay. I'm happy to just not leave it. I'm happy not to leave this planet, I guess.
I don't think I would ever pass the selection course, and I'd be scared stiff anyway, being far away from home. In fact, I think I might panic and they'd have to sedate me and put me in the hold in the spaceship while it travelled to Mars. But assuming that there was some particularly strong sedative so that I could keep a control of myself, I would very much like to wander around on the surface of Mars, obviously in a spacesuit, with a little geological hammer, chipping away at the rocks to see if I could find fossils. Nobody really thinks that life ever existed on Mars, but it would be fun to try and find out.
Okay, Osama, so how do you feel about leaving the planet? How do you feel about space travel? Would you leave the planet?
Yes.
Oh, you would?
I would, yes. Yeah.
Would you?
Yeah. Especially with what's going on.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay, and why? Why would you want to leave? Just because you don't like
to a better place.
But how do you know if it's going to be better?
How do you know it's going to rain or snow?
Oh my God, so you'd leave me?
No, I wouldn't leave you, I'd take you with me.
Oh, okay. Okay.
My thoughts on leaving the planet. I'd be well up for it, to be honest. I've always been a bit of a stargazer. Got an app and everything, and often found in the garden looking up, identifying various things. My only problem is, when I was little, there was a wreck in the middle of the estate I lived with, a couple of football pitches and a playground with a roundabout thing. And me and my mates used to get it going as fast as we possibly could and try and jump on. Now, if you think the Earth is actually spinning about 1,000 miles an hour, getting back on is going to be pretty tricky.
So, what's your thought on leaving this planet?
Yeah, we'll go if they have first class travel and affordable one.
Yeah, right, okay. Affordable business class or first class, then yeah, why not?
Personally, I'm stubborn and hopeful that the people in power and the clever ones who make things and all the rest of it can make our planet secure and workable for the future, and giving hope to the idea that we don't need to escape planet Earth. There's so much here still to discover and to find out. That's what I reckon.
Моя мама использовала такой календарь, отрывной календарь. Они были очень популярны in Russia, и в России. Okay.
Because the planet is going to die. The sun's going to die. Therefore Earth will die. So we need to go out and explore space.
Would you go?
I would have gone when I was young.
Хотела полететь в космос. I would like to go into space.
I take great reassurance that generations ago, many generations ago in the 19th century, people had some kind of knowledge of space, almost of going into space. Okay, that didn't actually happen until the 20th century, but I feel people's spirit was there then. So, for example, many examples in music and literature, but I think as we are in London, the wonderful Londoner John Keats, who died at age 23, this was very much, I think, this was on his mind, looking at anything, tree, hill, but what was next, what's ahead, what horizons are there, both inside and outside and beyond. So, would you like to hear a bit?
Yes, very much.
It's not long. Right. Much have I travelled in the realms of gold, and many goodly states and kingdoms seen. Round many western islands have I been, which bards in fealty to Apollo hold. Oft of one wide expanse had I been told, that deep-browed Homer ruled as his demesne, yet did I never breathe its pure serene, till I heard Chapman speak out loud and bold. Then felt I like some watcher in the skies when a new planet swims into his ken, or like stout Cortez when with eagle eyes he stared at the Pacific, and all his men looked at each other in wild surmise, silent upon a peak in Darien. So there you are. That, like he's thinking of a mountain, but I think the feeling is way beyond his life and his generation. He very sadly died about 2 years after he wrote that.
Incredible to hear the sort of responses that has. I think it's really a testament to how inventive and imaginative I think people are. Buffy, would you like to maybe say something about the people who participated in that? There.
No, Rafy, I'd just like to thank the people who participated. So thank you, Wing Wong, Rowan Moore, Paul Hamlin, Camille, Andrew Ray, David Harrison, Anthony Best, Seagren, Terry Pearson, Osama, Kevin, Alan and Yankee, Lee Dorby, Angela, and Brian Wise. I'd just like to thank them all for their fantastic videos that they sent me. And that's it, really.
Well, next we have another film, which is called the 9-herb charm. So I think first we're going to hear from Stella Scott. She's recorded a message. She can't be here today, but she's recorded something to tell us a bit about the making of the film. And then probably Buffy, I think you'll also say something.
Yes, I'll say something after Stella, yeah.
Okay, I'll play this.
Okay.
Hi everyone, I'm really sorry I can't be there tonight. Unfortunately, I'll be stuck at work, but Liz has asked me to read my introduction to Of Space and Time, 9-herb charm. So here we go. When Liz asked me to make a film about her collecting wildflowers in the City of London Square Mile, I wanted us to talk about the history behind the plants she looks for. The 9-herb charm is something that she has long been influenced by. It's an Anglo-Saxon poem that talks about the spiritual and healing properties of the 9 herbs: mugwort, plantain, lamb's cress, nettle, betony, chamomile, crabapple, thyme and fennel. Plants that she searches for and still finds today in the garden beds and in between buildings in the city. Walking through the city, you get a strong sense of history, not only in obvious things like the Roman wall, the Wren churches, the underground rivers, the Thames bankside, Victorian alleyways, or in the Tudor drinking houses, but in the constant, ever-evolving change of the more recent present. Over the past 20 years, Liz and I have seen many stone-fronted, mid-20th century buildings being replaced by glass-fronted towers. At first we resented the change, complained about it, but now we've come to admire it. And with that comes a deeper admiration for how the 9 plants of the 9-herb charm have survived 1,500 years in this space. The Ruin is another Anglo-Saxon poem we featured in the film, which describes the former glory of a Roman city. It opens with the lines, "This masonry is wondrous, fates broke it. Courtyard pavements were smashed, the works of giants is decaying." These words feel contemporary to me, like something you might say of a recently abandoned space, and I think capture a sense of the timelessness of the city that we've come to love. When I was young, Liz's mum took me to the Museum of London before I ever lived in the area. I remember her telling me that when Anglo-Saxons settled here, they built their city Ludenwic west of Londinium, outside the Roman walls where Covent Garden is today. Historians are still puzzled as to why they refused the comfort and shelter of the Roman city, with its houses, marketplaces, ports, and its technologically advanced water and heating systems. I assumed that they were superstitious, and that their suspicions of this cursed ruin were short-sighted. They'd later come inside its walls for protection against the Vikings. But Liz questioned that judgment. Maybe it was their confidence that directed their decision, she'd say, that the Anglo-Saxons had a way of life that worked, with a 9-herb charm at its centre, and didn't need for Roman influence. It would be like humans seeing how artificial intelligence lived, she'd say. We wouldn't immediately think to use their technology because we'd have more use of our own. So, yeah, that's my introduction, and the film is all about that, but it's also, a tribute to my mum's work and my dad's work. And it's also kind of a document of the lovely conversations you can have when you're with the two of them. Thank you.
I'll stop sharing for a second, just to hear Buffy, if you'd like to.
Am I unmuted?
Yes.
Okay, it seems that when gazing up into the heavens and into the universe, we become aware of a reverse effect. We glance down and begin to interrogate the ground beneath our feet, the minutiae at our feet. We are walking on a planet. Sometimes as we walk the streets, we can almost feel the curvature of the earth. The sun seems to revolve in the sky when it is we who are spinning. The moon pulls the tides and affects our moods. Further imagines the earth released from the bonds of gravity, taking off on its celestial course. Through the heavens, spaceship Earth, planet Earth, a great electrical boat traveling through time and space. That's it.
Thanks.
It's a bit like a dim memory, really. It's ghost sort of pegged out in basements, connected basements throughout the present existing city of London. So there's a sort of, I'm not quite sure what it's like. It's like a ghost in a box. Lying there, not doing anything, certainly not acting as a city.
It's really spooked the Anglo-Saxons. The remnants of the Roman city were there, but it was, to them, it was an alien space, it was an alien place, because they lived in modern huts, and suddenly this, modern as we call the town now, so they found it like a spaceship. They found it just so strange that they wouldn't go near it. It spooked them completely.
You mighty against 3, against 30. You mighty against poison, against infection. You mighty against the evil that fares through the land. Bettany. The nettle she is called, stands she against poison. She drives out wretchedness, throws out poison. This is the plant that against the worm battled mightily against poison. She mightily against infection. She mightily against evil that goes through the land. When you look up into the universe, you tend to start looking down at the earth far more than you ever did, or you recognise, oh my God, I'm walking on a planet. And then you just probably start delving into the place at your feet more. It's just a time thing, isn't it? All these things are just like places in time, and then the Romans and the Ludovic, and then this 9-herb charm.
Yeah, like holidays.
Yes, that's right, Brett, like holidays. And so these herbs still exist within the city. They still grow within the city after all of the centuries of development that's happened. And to me, that's just a miracle. Roofs are fallen, ruinous towers. The frosty gate with frost on cement is ravaged. Chipped roofs are torn, fallen, undermined by old age. The grasp of the earth possesses the mighty builders perished and fallen, the hard grasp of earth until 100 generations of people have departed. Often this wall, lichen grey and stained with red, experienced one rain after another and remained under storms. The high wide gate has collapsed. Still the masonry endures. In winds cut down, persisted on, fiercely sharpened, she shone. So because they are pressed and sent to the Natural History Museum and put in the archive, there is proof that that plant was there in, let's say, 2019 and existed. So when that new building falls down, the scientists in the future will be able to see that these seeds were there on that space. The plants have gone because a building has been built on top of them. A lot of moss. And this is called purple something, but it's always best to find the species once you get home and you have the books and everything. That's why we take the bag, put everything in the bag. But can you see tiny flowers there? Chamomile. What you disclosed and what you brought to an end at Alaford. That's never to infection. A man's life be sold, since for him someone chamomile as a meal prepared. You have to take a very, very tiny, 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 tiny piece of this. Gosh, which bit did I have? This seed has come from God knows where and floated down here. Isn't that incredible? It's so beautiful, isn't it? These are Anglo-Saxon plants, and they would have been used, and I suppose the most exciting thing about this is that they are still in the City of London, and that it's quite obvious when you think of this gathering of people would just go out their front doors and pick herbs. They're not going to try and get something from China or Nepal, are they? So it's quite wonderful to think that they could make all the medicines that they needed basically out of the plants that were almost on their doorstep, you know.
Healing city.
The healing city. It is a very, and there's 400 pages of medicinal recipes in the, it's like amazing. I mean, it's just amazing. And of course it's for cows and animals as well, not just for
So what's the healing city?
It banishes loneliness.
Yes, and that's too, Fred, is exactly right, because if you're lonely or say heartbroken, you wouldn't just take a pill, you would have a ceremony that you went through. So just let's take, if you're heartbroken, then you would go, a maiden would come and see you and take you to an east-westerly stream. She would then give you 3 cups of water from each part of the stream. Then you'd come back to your house and say you're heartbroken, but she would visit you for 9 days, bringing you a cup of water from the magic stream. So you can see, you're talking about loneliness, you wouldn't be so heartbroken, would you, if you had a maiden bringing you a cup of magic water every day? You can't be in a field, you can't be by the sea, so you have to make the most of the small space that you do live in, and so you do start looking into the minute things that are growing between the pavings and everywhere, and then minute and this last summer there was a lot of insects, a lot of different insects, because there wasn't so much pollution. And then again, the weird thing is that it then becomes like we always have this thing, and we always imagine space people to look like large insects, don't we? And so you look down and then you suddenly think, oh my God, I'm looking into space. I'm looking into an alien country. Okay, so it's fennel, crabapple, nettle, mugwort. It's another mugwort, it's 2 mugwort. And pass the other thing over. This is cardamom, but this is all bittercress. You remember when we were out today, we saw the beginnings of a bittercress plant coming up. Do you remember those leaves? And this is chamomile, plantain, and betony. Now, betony, we have to have family of betony, which is mint family. And it actually, there is one Bethany plant in the whole of London, but that's a secret. That noble thing, to the house, to the castle.
Absolutely beautiful and breathtaking. I think that film. And I'll to introduce the next one. I'll hand over to Pierre, who's one of the co-curators of this exhibition, and he's going to say a little bit about what we're going to see next.
Oh, hi everyone. It's a pleasure to be here this evening. I have the privilege of introducing this film Rooms, which Dan has made with Fred. And just to say really, that Fred has been a wonderful, still is a wonderful raconteur, speaker, one of the great teachers. I've known him for the best part of 50 years and never taught by him in an institution, but happened to meet him, casually at a party, probably in 1972. And we were standing in a room looking out of a window. And Fred was interested in the view, but also interested in the space that we were standing in. I just wanted to say, that Fred carries his learning very lightly. I think we all wish he'd written more. A great book of his on altering architecture covers such a range of things and is almost two books in one. He acknowledges and credits Julian Paul-Tuck in his introduction, but I think I am one of a whole number of people who have been influenced and pretty honored to have known him over all this time. And I think in the terms of this exhibition, I mean, just briefly, for those of you who weren't here last week when we opened it, I mean, it came about through a visit that Fred and Buffy and I made to Moscow about 5 years ago, and as part of a teaching program that I was involved with. And the conversation about the exhibition came about with Buffy and Fred and picked up by Gleb Sobolev in Moscow. And so the notion of talking about collage was very central, central to Fred's practice. And I think, although Fred is not going to discuss that in the film this evening, I think it's another very important element of how this exhibition has come together. But I don't really want to say any more. I think it's better to let Fred speak for himself. Thank you.
Thanks, Pierre. So let's
Well, you still need to go back to that idea of the room being this sort of discrete package of space, which is sort of self-sufficient in a way, coming out of classical times, really. And then you get people like Palladio begins to sort of, but I mean, everybody knows what a room is like, really. It's like a sort of shoebox, really, But it sort of has this sort of classical division. It comes from having, a focus. A fireplace is a focus to the room, and the rooms, the entrances and exits to the room. And these all sort of work together in some sort of formal relationship of alignments, generally axes, what architects called axes, lines, lining up. And then the classical plan in classical architecture, and you see it very clearly in Palladio, but also in all classical architecture, really. You get these alignments, so you get the plan being made up of people moving from room to room to room to room to room. What they called enfilade, like sort of so you could fire a gun through them, you know, sort of aligned in this way. And so the idea of the house is one of really of movement, really of bodily movement. You know, where you're moving from, you know, these discrete rooms, you know, separate rooms, and they're often called the damask room or the green room, and you know they have their own nature, and they're composed, and they become an art form, you know, and it sort of reaches its high point in London, actually, with two Scottish brothers, the Adams brothers, who work over a series of medieval houses, Osterley and at Sion, and make these sort of plans of grand rooms, salons, or whatever you call them, you know. At the same time, it's sort of referring back to Roman architecture. I mean, in Sion, for instance, the main space has got, I think, 12 columns pulled out of the Tiber, the Roman columns pulled out of the Tiber, which sort of orders a space, you know. So geometry, the ordering, the proportioning, all these things are what make the room and the art of the room. And of course, social life, you know, in the 18th century is very much, these houses in England begin to be, you know, the centres of political power. And you can imagine that somewhere like Lord Derby's house in Berkeley Square, or any of the great houses of London, you know, parties of people involving the Prime Minister and ministers, you know, people of power and their ladies and their mistresses and hangers-on, moving from room to room to room to room, you know, and rarely sitting down. Rarely sitting down. Furniture was in the classical plans really not a big item. Knowle has the biggest collection of Elizabethan furniture in England, and it's got about 30 chairs, you know. I mean, it just wasn't and if you look at Osterley as a sort of, which is Robert Adams' houses on the west side of London, and look at the Adam furniture, so also there's great furniture, Hebblewhite and Adam himself, of course, or his brother, begin to make wonderful furniture to go in these rooms and to be part of their adornment. But if you look at all the chairs at Osterley, the decoration is all on the front. There's no decoration on the back at all. And so these chairs were also certainly meant to be put against the wall. So the centre of the space was always left empty for people to mingle and to be talking and leading a social existence there. And if you did sit down, you know, and often the clothes, certainly if you look at clothing in Elizabethan times, you couldn't sit down in them, but obviously it was easier in later time. But nevertheless, there's a crucial change at that point. And we're talking really about the change from the classical to the modern, where in the classical room the space is absolutely primary, and furniture isn't allowed to destroy that sort of structure. You know, the alignments of the doors and the rooms, the surfaces are all kept clear and as pure as possible. And the furniture, if there is furniture, is kept to the side. And this changes violently in the 19th century, where we enter that age of Victorian clutter, you know, where everybody's house looks like a second-hand furniture shop, really, from late second half of the 19th century. But I think the crucial change before then, which is a sort of crisis of spatial morphology, is that in the 18th century, the architect, you know, begins to refer back to to Greek and Roman architecture. But then Ledoux does this great big monument to Newton, which is a great big empty sphere. And this is, you know, after Galileo, you know, the avant-garde architects begin to associate themselves with advancements in the sciences, and this again begins to be an aspect of modernism. Modernism, you know, Le Corbusier loved aeroplanes, you know, but this association between sciences and engineering and buildings begins to be an absolutely major element of architecture. But at the centre of that is that in the classic idea of space, it's axial. It's working at right angles, and it's discrete. These things that a plane could be made of room after room after room after room after room, and each room can be an entity. And this is what the classical plan is. And the spatial plan suddenly gets hit by this idea of multi-direction, that space is multi-directional. After Galileo says under his breath at the end of his trial about the sun, it doesn't move. It's the whole sort of, once that sort of notion that, you know, here we are whirling in multi-dimensional space began to gain purchase, and linked with its link with technology, the idea of transparency came in. Transparency. And, you know, so well, in the 19th century, you know, the Crystal Palace, of course, famously, but, you know, just advances in being able to make glass, you know, I mean, everybody knows, you know, from the 18th century, you can always have old 18th century glasses because the panes are cut from huge bubbles of glass that are hand blown. And in the 19th century, they begin to be able to roll glass in sheets, in sheets of glass. And the Crystal Palace and people like Paxton, obviously on the way hand, are advancing all these things. And architects begin to get this idea of transparency, which in a way is a heresy, because it breaks that essential idea of architecture that there's an inside and an outside. Transparency attempts to remove this, you know, which was this vital tension between the outside world and the inside world. You know, especially when it's raining. You know, if you just at that sort of fundamental level of what shelter is, and what you know, and so there's shelter from the elements, and then there's enclosure. But the idea of this idea that space, an irrefutable idea once the idea is taken, that the space is this multi-dimensional thing. It doesn't have an up and down. It just is everywhere and multi-dimensional, and the buildings need to reflect this. The whole classical plan is sort of kicked out of, you can see that becomes at some sort of level intellectually untenable. And one has to begin to think of as buildings, if they are entities at all, which begins to be questionable again because of the nature of transparency, are sort of incidental incidents in this sort of spatial continuum. You know, and most famously, you know, one thinks of Mies van der Rohe and the Farnsworth House, built by a lady dentist, I think she is, Dr. Farnsworth, this fantastic transparent pavilion near Chicago, which is just sheer glass windows, and yeah. An old friend of mine said that she used to have a white umbrella, because if she got up in the middle of the night, she used to hold this white umbrella between her and the glass in order to get to the bathroom. You know, there's one bit of enclosure is in the middle, is the bathroom. And so when you get to Corbusier and the 5 points of the new architecture, Pilotti, roof gardens, free facades, whatever,
none of them relate to rooms anymore at all, or enclosure at all. And he comes down to the idea of the essential cell, which is sort of the cell, you know, as in Monk's cell. He was fascinated by monasteries, Corbusier, just as a model of communal living, monasteries, you know, and in a way, I think it is very interesting. It is interesting, but anyway, but the notion of the cell, this thing that's obviously completely cleansed of all its classical references. Absolutely, it makes none of these references to being its own little cosmos. It's just simply enclosure, pure and simple. And Corbusier makes some reference, you know, in this photograph of the cell with a sort of bare metal bed in it. It's an incredibly spare room. He's incredibly sparse room. He says it's for the necessary biological functions. A man and his wife need privacy once in a while. That's what Corbusier comes down to, a sort of very sort of biological functionality with regard to the role of spatial enclosure. And you can see what a contrast this is to the richness of the classical plan, with its notion of progress through the plan from room to room to room. This alignment, these things are fused through distances, often to fireplaces, you know, which again were often wonderful creations, created by the Atom brothers too, you know, these focuses, and also, and then this, a bit later, the staircase begins to be a real focus of the plan and begins to have its own space. Certainly in English architecture, Home House is not a real clear example of this in Portman Square. You know, and you can just see that's again, it's sort of accentuate movement. You can see people sweeping down these great big sweeping staircases in their finery. And in a funny sort of way, architecture never quite got this, so that the modernism through some sort of banal functionality arrives with the idea of the plan, which is then the corridor. So this is when sort of functionality comes in as a sort of excuse for everything, really. Form-fitting function. Although, anyway, this common idea of functionality, if somehow the building is it's sort of very purpose-made, and then the corridor begins to be this sort of thing where you just move through the building, you know, in a straight line, without any of the sense of a promenade spatial that you get with a classical plan. It's just a simple shunting backwards and forwards, and the rooms are these cells which are plugged onto this spine, like well, you know, the Brussels sprout plan, I suppose, is quite often referred to. You know, this sort of stem with these cells plugged into it, and in a funny sort of way, modern architecture really has been, I think, really recently is stuck in this crisis ever since. So it can sort of do buildings with lots of small rooms, you know, Unit A, for instance, you know, our housing blocks are really big buildings, but with very small rooms in them. So again, the notion that a building, you know, Palladio says of a house it's made of big, large, big and middle-sized rooms, Palladio says of the house, you know, which, you know, I mean, you know, you know, you're tempted to say, of course, but except modernism rejects that idea, and it starts to make rooms as these functional things: living room, kitchen, dining room. You know, that space was related to functions. Space is specifically related to function. Sleep, you know, bedrooms.
And then you get this sort of cellular so the modern planet is sort of cellular arrangement of minimal spaces, and the modern architecture also becomes obsessed with the minimal dwelling, which sort of has a democratic impulse to it beneath. It's a Czech architect that does all the heavy lifting on them. But it become an out of the Bauhaus, but the sort of notion of somehow industry being able to manufacture houses for everybody, and somehow this would be what the minimal dwelling was, Yeah. Anyway.
Yes, I suppose that's one of those sort of conversational pieces, because it's I've just been sort of frantically making notes as I go, trying to say what I would kind of reply to it, it's just absolutely so much. It's a very clever way of linking spaces and space with Galileo and Newton. And I think it was Milton who first used the word space to mean the cosmos. Before that, I suppose it was just called the heavens or the cosmos or anything else, I suppose. But the idea that space, which previously had been either an abstract term meaning distance or displacement, or a concrete term meaning a place bounded by other things, became a completely open idea that space would go on forever until it reaches the edge of space in the sort of Einstein sense. And the idea of rooms being central to that is a really, really clever way of coming to that, I think. And then I've also written down glass. He mentions glass being, or the sort of advancements in the manufacture of glass going towards building materials and starting to destruct the idea of a delineation between inside and outside space. And when I think of the advancement of glass, I think of optics, so telescopes and photography, and that, of course, allowed us to conceive of the universe in a completely different way as well, where distances could be flattened down and contracted, and time could be stopped almost, with photographs being a captured moment. And it's really interesting that we come to this with a slightly different, I mean, he's an architect, obviously. So the inferences are different, but I think complementary. And then the third thing, and please do come and put your own thoughts in and reply as well. And I'd like to take some questions. I think Buffy and Dan and maybe Pierre will be able to answer some questions. But the last thing that I've got is when Fred mentions how Corbusier and the modernists became enamored of corridors, sort of transporting people from one utility space to another. It massively reminds me of the assembly line and the Henry Ford idea that a car would travel along a corridor of a sort and be added to at different times with one person doing one thing. And in a sense, that's a similar way to the modernist big block, where you have your rooms and you have corridors and you have corridors to your rooms. And in a modernist design city, you have corridors to the buildings. And each block does its own purpose, and the corridor transports us down into it. And it is a bit kind of industrial and a bit depersonalized in a way that the house is a bit like Pushkin House, actually, and other 18th century, because Pushkin House is Henry Flitcroft, 1744, I think. So it's one of those sort of very typical Georgian houses with big rooms and medium rooms, and not so many corridors. I mean, there's an open space in the middle and rooms off that, but it's the walkway between the rooms that's more important. So I think it's just absolutely wonderful that we've been able to hear that, and it's just so thought-provoking and just clever. So please do ask any questions, ask away if you have anything to say. You can unmute as well if you really want to say something, because we've got 20 minutes.
I was thinking if Fred is talking also about the kind of loss of interiority, right? And I recall when I was in Fred and Bob's unit at the AA, I recall Bathsheba Ronan making an amazing plan of a house where everything was taking place as a kind of interface, and that I think it was Fred who described it as that she would enter the city from this house. It was like an interconnection between two interiors, actually. That the city would be an interior world and the house would be another interior world. They were kind of different, but they were both. So I think there's a big loss of the interiority. It's one of the great losses actually of our times, really. And I think he's onto that too, right?
Absolutely. I mean, because in a built environment, you set out of your house, you are walking on a floor of a kind. You're not really on direct blank, sort of natural, so it's called ground. And pretty much everywhere you go is a kind of room with walls and sometimes even a ceiling. I think it's very, very perfect.
Further than that, I think Hölderlin talks about, he says drinnen den Alpen. He even thinks that the Alps are an interior. I think it's a matter of how you connect with the world, really, right? If you're outside of it, looking at it, or if you are engaged, right? It's about connection. It's more on a mental level than anything else, I guess. I think
you can go through the Alps these days without setting foot outside of your car. So it's I think the way that we live today, especially now with the pandemic where we're all in our little boxes, we are basically inside all the time, in a sense.
I'm just going to defend the corridor a bit because Louis Kahn sort of spoke about served and served spaces, and Hermann Hertzberger sort of really explored this tension in between rooms as places of congregation and stuff. So that classical plan, there's always an underdog, isn't there? There was a kitchen somewhere. There was something going on, but like up and above stairs or whatever that old cliche was.
Celebration of the backsides.
Yes.
Oh, they're marvelous ones. I mean, I recall a building by Sisa. It's a leisure house. It's nearby the sea. It's one of the early ones where he has, I mean, the corridor, and then it's really a transitional space. It's like a gallery or a corridor, but it's a little wider than a corridor. But there are smaller rooms with just one door giving onto it. But it's a workspace. And the same occurs in a house by Ellen Key, if you're familiar with the Swedish writer from past century, when she designed her own house. Incredible kind of gallery space. I mean, these are the kind of
they're ambiguous spaces, right? In a way and therefore they are open to interpretation. It's amazing when they are made into workspaces where people sit and write or draw. Something incredible occurs, I think, when it's not the kind of chamber, but it's a transitional space. Yeah, agree with that.
I just would like to add to that also, because I think the idea of the corridor or the increased size of the corridor becoming as important as the rooms. And you do see that quite a lot in past architecture. You see it in Moorish architecture where the circulation spaces around the court are also somewhere where people go to engage with other people, part inside, part out. It's just, I think it's very interesting at the moment because I'm enjoying very much teaching some students, third year students at Kingston actually, where Fred was. And one of the students is really playing around with this idea of very large corridors. And we've been talking about it a lot. All of her plans are just giving this overly generous space to these spaces that we would consider to be just a means to get from one place to another. And it's a really interesting scheme, and it's interesting that it's come up in this discussion. So maybe that's another way of looking at.
But then it becomes a classical pantsuit, doesn't it? If it's a procession through room to room,
classical.
It becomes classical again. So it's
but it isn't.
Yeah.
It's a strange kind of space that it's something a little bit like the inside-outside space. So, and sometimes it's connecting to the outside, sometimes it's not. It's just this. It's a slight no man's land, but it's a space that allows something extraordinary to happen, or a function to happen.
Which becomes processional again.
It's not every day. No, I think it's like being able to stop. It's like a pausing space as well. So I think when I think of procession, I think it's a moving through, and by widening the corridor slightly, or by widening this passageway, it becomes a passageway. Like in old towns that sometimes had passageways under buildings and things like that. They become something else. They're not just about a movement. They're actually about something happening there.
I was going to just say something about the kind of some of Fred's teaching. In a way, was there also political implications about the non-hierarchical interconnection of spaces and rooms, which I think is really, maybe it's to do with, I see him something as a child of the 60s in some ways, and that the kind of optimism of that kind of social space, a democratic space, which it's a kind of interesting conversation that we used to have. I'm not quite sure that it happens quite in the same way anymore, and that's, but I do feel Fred was, and still is, like an optimist around, how people interact and the way those spaces connect, give us something, different, maybe in the way that Fourier had a kind of an idea for the emancipation of women, a long time ago. And the way that space could be shared democratically.
Yeah, I think it's that sharing is a very interesting thing. I think perhaps that's what is coming out in these in this work with the student, is this idea of these spaces become somehow a democratic space. It's not a space owned by anybody, so it allows for a social interaction as well, an unexpected one. And I think the concept of the way that Fred, I've taught with Fred, had the great pleasure of teaching with Fred. He taught me how to teach. Unfortunately, he didn't teach me, but taught me how to teach. And I'm very aware that experiencing that, teaching with other people now, not Fred and not those people, is that sense, that ability that Fred had to understand space, and hearing him talking about it this evening in his little film was amazing. That, you know, the kind of continuity through the knowledge that you've always known that he has, you know, was very, very special.
Yeah, I know, actually, just to come back to the non-hierarchical spaces, I'm pretty sure Moise Ginsberg wrote about that, and that was a kind of quite a important thing that constructivist architects thought about. So that kind of nicely brings it back to the origins of this exhibition, where Fred and Buffy went over to Moscow to check out the repairs or the restorations of Ginsberg's early Soviet constructivist buildings. We are coming to the end of our time, but I just would like to make mention of one thing that I learnt from the talk that I'd looked up earlier, which is this sort of cenotaph to Newton idea. It's not really. I mean, I guess I'm going to make it relevant to this because it's based on, well, it's dedicated to the life of a person who did more for our understanding of the universe and the cosmos than probably anyone else ever. And it takes the form of a huge orb. I'm just going to get a picture of it up and see if I can share that, because it's one of the most incredible things I've ever seen. Of course, it didn't actually ever. Fred, let's see if we can unmute.
Well,
Hi,
hello, it's Fred.
Hi.
Haven't you got anything better to do?
I'd like to have a glass of port with you here in my studio in Stockholm.
Yeah. Oh, it's lovely to see you. It's lovely to see you. My hug and kisses. My hug and kisses. It would be lovely to see you, Kevin.
and everybody.
And everybody.
Okay.
It would be lovely to see you all.
Yeah, I miss that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, please come and see me if you're in London or passing through London. I'm always good for a cup of tea.
Nice. It's been really incredible to hear from you, actually, Fred. And I'll share my screen now because I've got this picture of the cenotaph to Newton up here. So I think you can now, if you see it now, you can understand why it's so relevant to this exhibition, because it just looks like a planet. It's an incredible imaginary architectural design that would have I think would have been a very fitting tribute, because inside it has a plan of the stars as seen from Earth, that you go into the building and because of the light cut, all these little lanterns cut into the stone dome, you get to see the stars, and then at night it's lit up with one of these I don't know what they call them actually. One of these plans of the solar system, and it becomes like the sun at night. And it's this kind of brilliantly imaginative, and it was so extravagant that of course it could never happen. But it would be great if someday on Mars, maybe where the gravity is less and people can build higher, they could build something that's so human in its ambition. I'll close that now, but thank you again, Fred and Buffy and Pierre and Dan, and Stella's not here, but our thanks to everybody who's joined us this evening and asked questions, and Obviously, this discussion has been absolutely brilliant. So thank you all for chipping in. It's been really great to have such a celebration of the works of Fred and Buffy as part of our exhibition.